With some luscious ribbon, beautiful beads, and a super easy technique, you'll have a jewelry accessory that you can pin just about anywhere.
It's who I am, a little rare, some sour fare, and some mystery, putting it all together, doing what I do, doing what I do.
Hey everybody, I'm Bethany. I'm so glad you're here. This is the project we're working on today. It's this beautiful brooch. I have 3 layers of ribbon in different textures and widths and colors. And I also have a cluster of beads in the middle along with a pin back. Now we're going to be starting this project making our ribbon tiers. I have this beautiful olive-toned polka dot grosgrain ribbon. This is available at PrintWorks Collection. Now before we begin the stitching process on this ribbon, I want to show you an easy technique for knotting your thread. Now you might think, what's so hard about that? But this is a great little trick to have in your back pocket. I'm going to be using contrasting thread throughout this project so you can more easily see what I'm doing. Now I've doubled my thread onto my needle, and taking my needle in my dominant hand, which is my right hand, and holding the thread in my left hand, which is my non-dominant hand, I'm going to point the thread and the needle at one another. Take your index finger on whatever hand you have holding your needle and grab onto that end of your thread. So essentially you're just holding that in one hand. Now wrap your thread around your needle and scoot it down, scoot those wrapped threads down into where you're also holding that with your dominant hand. Gently grab the tip of your needle and start to pull those wrapped loops down the length of your thread. Now you have this small, dainty little knot. It's a great way to make a neat knot, and it works every single time. So with our thread knotted, we'll be starting a running stitch down the length of our ribbon. Now this ribbon actually is not double-sided. There's one side that's printed and one side that's not. I want the printed side to be up, so I'm going to pass my needle in through the back of the ribbon. Start your stitching about 1/4 to 1/2 inch away from the end and just slightly in from the inside edge. Now the basic stitch is also called a basting stitch. It can also be called a running stitch. It's a very, very simple stitch. It's just simply passing your thread in and out of the fabric, or in this case your ribbon. And you can see that I'm not even pulling it through every time. I'm actually kind of gathering it up on my needle. But when I do pull it through, you'll notice that my stitches are very evenly spaced. And when I pull it even tighter, it's going to gather my ribbon into a little half circle. I'm going to keep stitching down the line of my ribbon until when I pull on the thread, my ribbon forms a complete circle and maybe even overlaps slightly. Now we're ready to close off that gathering. Gather your ribbon tightly, and we're going to just make a little knot. Make a small stitch in your ribbon. Don't pull it through all the way. Make sure you have a small little loop on your thread. Pass your needle through the loop and pull tightly. I'd like to do this 2 or 3 times just to make sure my gathers hold. You don't want your pin unraveling while you're out on a date with your hubby. Now I have that nice and tightly gathered. Now I'm just going to snip off the excess ribbon, leaving about 1/4 to 1/2 inch of excess on that side. I'm going to save this for another project. Snip off your thread as well. Now you can see that we have this nice little gathered ribbon. Now we're just going to close it up. Remember how at the beginning when I had you start 1/4 to 1/2 inch away from the bottom end? Well, that formed a little tab, and then we also formed a little tab when we just left an excess of our ribbon. Those little tabs are what we're going to sew together. Touch them with their right sides facing one another. Pick up your needle and your thread one more time, making sure that it's knotted, and we're going to sew those 2 tabs together with another running stitch. Now, all you have to do is finish off your stitch with a simple knot like I just showed you. Here is the finished ribbon circle. You can see here that I actually sewed it with some clear thread because I wanted mine not to have that red thread showing. Now I wanted 3 layers for my ribbon pin, so I made 3 layers of ribbon. I have this beautiful coppery gold tone organza ribbon. Has a nice stiff texture to it. This is available at PrintWorks Collection. I have a brown floral satin ribbon, and then of course my grosgrain ribbon. Now you might be wondering, well, how long is the ribbon that you're working with? I like to work with 12 inches or longer, because if you pre-cut your ribbon and it's too short and you gather it together to close your circle, it can actually kind of form into a little doll skirt. So you want your ribbon to lie flat, so work with plenty of ribbon. Now to stack these together, it's very simple. I like to think that I've formed donuts with my ribbons, and I like to align my donut holes, holding them firmly in one hand, one on top of each other and making sure they're centered. Pick up your needle and thread one more time, making sure that you've made that nice knot. We're going to pass our needle in through the back, making sure you catch that back layer. We're going to make that close to the center of our donut holes through all of the layers of the ribbon and towards the front, and pull tightly. Now simply pass your needle back through the top, catching all the layers, back towards the back. Simply making another running stitch through all of the layers. Keep sewing around the circle in this manner until your layers are firmly stitched to one another. Now I wanted to add a lot of pop, a lot of sparkle, a lot of bling to this beautiful pin. Whenever I'm designing a pin or a brooch, I like to look at the colors that I'm using in the ribbons. What kind of look am I going for? Am I going for something kind of whimsical, funky, or am I wanting something really elegant? I like the colors of my brown floral ribbon, so I went to artbeads.com and found some beautiful beads. This bead right here is a Swarovski crystal. This is the Polygon bead in Padparadscha. I love to choose beads in different shapes for Swarovski. There's a ton of different shapes and colors, and this one was just a little bit unique. We're going to sew that one on in just a second. Here, this one is really one of my very favorites. This is a Wasabi pearl nugget. It's a very unusual color that really blended well with the ribbons that I chose. This right here is a crystal golden shadow. This is in the Cubist shape. Swarovski has very precise facets, and that's what makes them so sparkly. Right here I have a gold-filled stardust bead. I really liked this one. I don't wear a lot of gold typically, but I liked this one because it wasn't a bright gold. It was almost looked like it had been rolled in golden sugar. It's just very subtly sparkly and very pretty. Now, taking your needle and thread and keeping in mind that when you are sewing on beads, some of the holes are drilled smaller than the others, especially if you're sewing on pearls. Keep that in mind when you're choosing the needle that you want to bead with. I'm going to be using the same stitching process that I did to sew the layers together. We're going to pass our needle through the back towards the front and pull it through. I'm going to guide, in this case, my Wasabi pearl onto my needle. Pass my needle back through the top and down again. Now I'm ready to put on my Swarovski. This is the golden shadow. I love this color. It doesn't have a lot of color to it, and it can look antique-y, it can look funky. It's really sparkly. Now remember, I am using contrasting thread while I'm sewing this on. You can certainly use a coordinating thread, or you can use a clear beading thread. Now I'm sewing on my Polygon Swarovski. This is actually in the color of Padparadscha, which is a beautiful salmony pink. Now you'll notice that I'm sewing on my larger beads first. I like to do that, and then I can fill in with smaller beads as I go. This little gold-filled bead is a little bit smaller, so it's going to go on next.
It's who I am, a little rare, some savoir-faire, and some mystery.
Now you can see my cluster of beads that I've sewn on the top securely, and I actually did this with some clear beading thread. And you know, I like to play with them. You can kind of position them where you want. You can roll them around, especially if you have, you know, one of the centers facing upwards. You can roll them to where it looks just like a cluster of pirate treasure. Now we're ready to sew on our pin back. This is really easy. Flip your ribbon upside down and take your pin back. Now there are a few tips about where to place your pin back. One of those tips is you need to see how do you want to orient your pin. I think I want mine kind of in this bottom corner, and so I'm going to make sure to put my pin back on top. Another tip is not to ever sew your pin back in the center of your brooch. The beads and the ribbons will cause your brooch to sag and no one would see your pretty work. So you have to sew it off center. Another tip is to make sure you think about, are you right-handed or are you left-handed? I'm right-handed, and so when I put a pin on, I like to be able to guide my pin from my right to my left. So those are all tips for where to place your pin back. Open up your pin back and just grab a couple of regular straight pins and pin your pin in place. And this just keeps it steady while you're stitching it on. Grab your needle and thread, and I'm going to catch my bottom layer of ribbon, and I'm going to pass my needle in through this hole and pull tightly. You can hide your knot behind the pin as well. Now we're just going to keep sewing down the line through these holes until you feel like your pin is secure. Let's take a look at the finished one. Here is the finished pin. You can see it has this really pretty cluster of beads, and here's my pin back. Now I stitched my pin back on with green thread, and you'll note that I stitched all the way through the holes, but I also stitched on the tops and on the bottoms so it wouldn't wiggle too much. It's very secure and ready to pin on a purse, on my jacket, on my diaper bag, on my shirt, on my hat if I'm wearing one. Now let's take a look at some of the other pins I made. Now you've probably noticed that I'm wearing one of my designs today. This pin I created with some crocheted trim, some actually pillow trim, some other of that great PrintWorks ribbon, that sheer ribbon. I also put some art beads on it, some gemstones. This is labradorite. There's some of that gold-filled stardust bead and some Swarovski pearls. Swarovski pearls are great if actual pearls aren't really in your budget. They come in every color that Swarovski makes. Another pin that I made is this fun, funky, whimsical pin using lots of fun ribbons, polka dots, and gingham. I also used just a single rhodium-plated jet filigree Swarovski button. It's a beautiful centerpiece to this funky ribbon. Now once you've picked your ribbons and gathered up your beads, this is a really quick project to have a great accessory for that new outfit that you bought this morning, and you can wear it out tonight. You have no excuse. I'll see you next time.
To create this project yourself, download this week's design guide. You'll get step-by-step instructions along with special make-it-your-own bonus tips and ideas.